Hello, happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Crime and Conviction. So last week I spoke about a doctor who killed, and then I was wondering if I was going to turn it into a theme or not, what kind of theme it would be. So I decided to turn it into a theme where we'll talk about medical professionals, whether doctors or nurses, that have chosen to kill. Today we'll be talking about Dr. Jeffrey Robert MacDonald, and I must tell you that this case is a doozy. I also have to put a trigger warning because it is crimes against children. It's not only children, but it's included in the mix. It does get a bit graphic and gruesome in some parts, so if you gotta tap out, just tap out, and I will see you guys next week. Jeffrey was born on October 12th, 1943. He was the second of 3 children. He grew up in a poor household and he had a strict disciplinarian father. Now his father wasn't violent physically, but he demanded obedience from his family. Growing up, Jeffrey had a very successful high school life. He was voted most popular and most likely to succeed. He was also prom king, but in addition to all of this popularity, he was smart and he got straight A's. It was during high school that Jeffrey met Colette Stevenson. They became friends and later started a relationship. The following summer, after they started their relationship, Colette broke up with Jeffrey. I don't know the reason for this, and he moved on with a girl called Penny. With his grades, he earned a 3-year university scholarship and he enrolled into university as a medical student. By the second year of college, Jeffrey had broken up with Penny and he rekindled his relationship with Colette. But she wasn't the only one. He was seeing other women. The two went to separate universities, so they would often exchange letters, and whenever Jeffrey could, he would hitchhike down to her college so they could spend weekends together. When he found out she was pregnant in August 1963, he promised to marry her, and she left college to take care of the child. With Colette's parents' blessings, they got married that September and 100 people attended their wedding ceremony. On April 18th, 1964, their baby was born. It was a girl and they named her Kimberly. Jeffrey completed his scholarship and moved his family into a 1-bedroom apartment in 1965. Jeffrey got accepted into another medical school and he was focusing on his studies and he was doing part-time jobs to help with the finances. Colette, she was a stay-at-home wife. She was taking care of their child and she was taking care of their household. On May 8th, 1967, their second child was born. A year later, Jeffrey graduated from medical school and he moved his family again while he completed a 1-year internship at a medical center in New York. Jeffrey said this internship was horrendous for himself and his family. He would often work 36-hour shifts with just 12 hours at home, so his daughters and his wife didn't really get much time with him, and when they did get the time, which was the 12 hours, he was exhausted. When he finally completed his internship, he went on a vacation with his wife, and when they returned, he enrolled in the army. He enrolled on June 28th, 1986 as a physician, and he went through a 6-week training course. In late August, he was stationed in North Carolina and his wife and daughters joined him shortly after. Now, where he was staying on base was a section for married officers, and his family soon became really popular amongst the other neighbors. Now, they had no complaints about them other than they would argue a bit often. Now, Colette had 2 years of university studies and she had aspirations of going back to school to finish her bachelor degrees in English literature, and then she would teach part-time. I'm not quite sure if Jeffrey was supportive of this or not. By December, Colette was 3 months pregnant with the couple's 3rd child and their 1st son. She had written letters to some of her college friends saying that she wasn't really happy or normal, but she and her husband were very content that the child was to be born in July and their family would be complete. Christmas was fast approaching and Jeffrey decided to buy the family a pony. They were going to be relocated to a farm soon, so he thought that this was the perfect gift. Now on Christmas Day, he drove down to the stables with his stepfather-in-law and his family to surprise them with this pony. The girls were really excited about this and they named the pony Trooper. The marriage seemed a bit wishy-washy, but for the most part, it seemed to be going fine. But if the marriage was going so well and so wonderful, we wouldn't be here on Crime and Conviction now, would we? February 16th, 1970. Jeffrey took his daughters down to the stables to play with and feed the pony. They returned to the home at around 5:45. Jeffrey showered and changed into his pajamas. The family ate their dinner and Colette went off to an evening class. Jeffrey played with his daughters till around 7 p.m. when he had to put the youngest to bed. Kimberly, the oldest, was playing a game around the coffee table. Jeffrey went to sleep for an hour and he got up, watched Kimberly's favorite TV show with her until it was her bedtime. At 9:40, Colette returned home. The couple sat on the couch and they watched television together until Colette decided it was time for her to go to bed. Jeffrey stayed out there on the couch watching TV until he fell asleep. In the wee hours of February 17th, police received a call from Jeffrey. Help! 544 Castle Drive. There's been a stabbing. Hurry. 10 minutes later, military police arrived to the address. Now at first they thought that they were just simply answering to a domestic disturbance call, but boy, were they wrong. They found the front door closed and locked and inside the house was dark. They tried calling, no one answered. When they went around to the back of the house, they realized that the back door was wide open, but the screen to the back door was closed. It wasn't locked, but it was just, pushed up. The police sergeant entered the house. He was looking around, he was calling out, and then he went into the master bedroom. He shortly ran out and he said that they should call for medical. Colette was on the floor of the master bedroom, laying on her back. One eye open, one breast exposed. She had been hit repeatedly all over her body and both of her arms were broken. Now, more than likely, the broken arms were defensive wounds because she probably held them up trying to cover her face. She had been stabbed 21 times with an ice pick and 16 times around the neck and chest with a knife. Beside Colette was a knife and her husband. He was lying face down, wounded but alive. His head was on Colleen's chest with one arm around her neck. When the police approached him, he whispered, "Could you check on my kids? I heard my kids crying." 5-year-old Kimberly was found in her bed. She had been repeatedly beaten around the head and she had been stabbed in the neck around 8 to 10 times. She laid on her left side. Her skull was fractured and one of the hits were so direct that it caused her cheekbone to push out through her skin. The wounds to Kimberly's head were so severe that it caused brain bleeding. Then it was more than likely that she fell into a short coma and death soon after. 2-year-old Kristen was also found in her room on her left side. She had been stabbed 33 times across her neck, chest, arms, and back with a knife and 15 times with an ice pick. The ice pick wounds were shallow, but 2 of the knife wounds had penetrated her heart. On the headboard in the master bedroom in 8-inch capital letters, written in blood, was the word pig. Jeffrey was given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and he sat upright. He started crying and saying, "Oh my God, look at what they did to my wife. I'm going to kill those acid heads." He was immediately taken to the hospital, but while he was being brought out on a stretcher, he kept shouting that he wanted to see his kids. At the hospital, Jeffrey was examined and his wounds were far less numerous and severe than his wife and kids. He had cuts and bruises, he had fingernail scratches, and he had a single stab wound between his ribs on his right torso that caused his lung to partially collapse. This stab wound was described as clean, small, and sharp. He also had a mild concussion. Now, none of his wounds were really serious, so he was treated in hospital and let out after 9 days. When he was finally questioned by authorities, this is what he had to say. On February 17th at around 2 in the morning, Jeffrey had just finished doing the dishes from dinner. He went into the master bedroom to go to bed, but unfortunately, his daughter Kirsten had wet his side of the bed. He took her to her room, and because he didn't want to wake his sleeping pregnant wife, he took a blanket from her room, which is Kirsten's room, went into the living room and fell asleep on the couch. Later, he was woken up to screams from his oldest daughter and his wife. He could hear his wife screaming, "Help, Jeffrey, why are they doing this to me?" By the time he jumped up off the couch, he was attacked by 3 men. 2 of them were white, 1 of them black. The shorter of the 2 white men had surgical gloves on. Now, there was a 4th person in the room, which was a blonde white woman standing in the corner. She was wearing tall, high-heeled boots, and she had a white floppy hat on. She held a candle and she was chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." While the 3 men were hitting Jeffrey, the female in the room kept shouting out for them to hit him again and hit him again. Now, eventually, Jeffrey was knocked unconscious. When Jeffrey regained his consciousness, the intruders were gone and he stumbled room to room doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his daughters, and then he came into the master bedroom and saw his wife. He pulled a small knife from his wife's chest and threw it on the floor, so that explained the knife being beside her. And then he tried to feel for a pulse. He wasn't getting a pulse, and he tried to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on her as well, but it wasn't working. He draped his pajama top over his wife's dead body and phoned for help. Then he went to lay beside her and wait on the police. As for the investigation, when the officers first arrived to the home and got a brief description from Jeffrey of the intruders, they immediately started to search the community, but by 6 a.m. they didn't find anything, so they called off the search. The murder weapons were recovered just outside the back door. It was an ice pick, a kitchen knife, and a 31-inch piece of lumber. All of these items came from the home and they were wiped clean of fingerprints, but Jeffrey said that he had never seen these items before. When the physical evidence was studied, there was very little to support Jeffrey's story and they started to not believe him. The living room that Jeffrey had this big struggle with these 3 men showed no sign of disorder other than a coffee table being hit over. Jeffrey claimed that his pajama top was ripped in the living room, but there were no fibers found in the living room. Instead, it was found in the daughter's room and underneath his wife's dead body. Blood-stained pieces of lumber was found in all 3 of the rooms, none in the living room. And even though Jeffrey took the phone to call the police after touching his children and touching his wife, their blood wasn't found on the phone. There was also a piece of glove that was found underneath the headboard in the master bedroom that were similar to the gloves that Jeffrey owned in the home. It had rained that night and Jeffrey said that the female intruder's boots, It was all wet and literally dripping with water, but there was no footprints found in the home other than one single bloody footprint that was found in Kirsten's room. The forensic evidence also pointed to Jeffrey. When the neighbors were questioned, they said that they didn't hear any shouting or screaming or anything, but earlier they heard Colette talking or shouting in an angry, loud tone. A 16-year-old neighbor who usually babysat for the couple came forward to tell the authorities that weeks before the murder happened, it seemed as if the couple were on shaky ground because they were so distant from each other. By February 23rd, the authorities called off their nationwide search for the intruders. On April 6, 1970, Jeffrey was interrogated once again. Now, they asked him if his wound was self-inflicted, and he denied it. Of course, he's like, no, definitely not, I would never do this, blah blah blah. And then the investigators moved on to ask him about inconsistencies in the forensic evidence. They asked about the lack of evidence in the living room, and they also asked how could the blood from the crime scene be mixed all over the place. Now let me explain that, because that sounds a bit confusing. So all three killings took place in 3 separate rooms. However, the blood from other persons were in other rooms. So Colette's blood was in Kirsten's room, even though Colette was stabbed in her room. So how could her blood be in another room as well? How could pieces of his shirt that was ripped in the living room be found in the bedroom, especially underneath his dead wife's body, when he claimed that he came inside and saw her lying there? And if these people came to trash the place and kill people, how come the place wasn't trashed? The living room just had the coffee table turned over. The place wasn't really in shambles. There was no busted furniture. There was no broken windows, nothing. Jeffrey had no explanation for any of these questions, and he even said that the investigators were running out of ideas and trying to pin this whole thing on him. During the interview, the investigators asked Jeffrey if he was willing to submit to a polygraph test, and he immediately said yes. But after the interview, he went to the investigators and told them that he changed his mind and there will be no polygraph test. That evening, he was relieved from his duty and placed under restriction pending further inquiries. The following day, he was assigned an army lawyer and he hired a defense attorney. On May 1st, he was formally charged on 3 counts of murder, and on that same day, he wrote a letter to Colette's mother and his stepfather-in-law professing his innocence. Now, what happened that morning, we will never know, but here's what was theorized. Now, a fight between Colette and Jeffrey began in the master bedroom, either about Kirsten wetting his side of the bed constantly or his infidelity. Colette probably hit him on his forehead with her hairbrush, leaving a mark. So yeah, there was actual evidence of a mark on his forehead. Then he retaliated by hitting her, first with his fist, and then he probably lost control and began to hit her with the piece of lumber. While this whole commotion was going on, Kimberly, whose blood was found in the master bedroom, probably walked in on the whole thing and got hit on her head. Maybe that was an accident. The hit that she got on her head was probably one of the more serious hits. So he took his wounded daughter back to her bedroom, stabbed her, and then proceeded to go to his younger daughter's room to finish the job or get rid of the final witness so his story could be more believable. I don't know. Before he could complete his plan, his wife had gained consciousness, went into Kirsten's room and threw her body on top of her daughter in hopes of protecting her. This did not stop Jeffrey. After killing Kirsten and Colette, in Kirsten's bedroom. He then wrapped his wife's body into a sheet and dragged her to the master bedroom. Jeffrey then tried to cover up the murder. He got some surgical gloves from his kitchen and he wrote the word pig on the headboard in Colleen's blood. Now, this part of the murder was probably inspired by the Manson family murders that took place 6 months before this incident. And also, investigators found some magazines in the house that spoke about the Manson family murders. So he was probably like, okay, 2 and 2 make 4. Let's just blame it on some acid heads. Anyways, he then took his pajama shirt, draped it over his wife, stabbed her a few more times with the ice pick, took a scalpel, went into the bathroom, hit himself, looked in the mirror, stabbed himself between the ribs. Very neat, very clean. He got rid of the gloves. He got rid of the scalpel. He wiped the murder weapons clean of his fingerprints and then he discarded them through the back door. Called 911 and then laid beside his wife waiting for the authorities. On February 23rd, 1970, Colette and her daughters were laid to rest side by side. Initially, the graves had the name MacDonald, but later they removed these names and put Colette's name Stevenson. An initial army hearing of guilt took place on July 6, 1970, and it lasted until September. Jeffrey's defense called out a whole lot of incompetence on the side of the investigators. When they arrived to the house, they trampled all over the place, tracking evidence here, there, and everywhere. And also, the ambulance driver had stolen Jeffrey's wallet. A policeman testified that he saw a woman fitting the description of the intruder about half a mile down the road from the home, and he found it a bit strange because based on the time of night that he saw her standing out there in a white wide brim hat and some high heel boots, but he didn't really do anything about it because, you know, you can't get arrested for just standing out on the street. And at that time, he didn't even know that this woman might have been involved in this murder. In August, the authorities were approached by a delivery man that said he knew the identity of the blonde woman with the white wide brimmed hat. He said that it was a local 17-year-old drug addict named Helena, and on the night of the murders, she was in the company of 2 or 3 men sitting in a car outside her apartment. He also said that he had seen her multiple times before in the attire that was described, which is the hat and the boots, but after the 17th, she stopped wearing it. Also, on the day of the funeral for the MacDonalds, she wore black. Helena was located and questioned about her whereabouts on the night of the crime. She was very vague and inconsistent in her statements. She said that she was with her boyfriend on the night of February 16th and they just drove around aimlessly, but she was too drugged out to remember anything from that night. She couldn't say if she was in the house that night or not, but you had persons come forward to say that she admitted her involvement in the murders to them. However, she wasn't subpoenaed because her statements wasn't quite reliable. Jeffrey had favorable character witnesses, which included Colette's mother and his stepfather-in-law, and he himself testified for 3 days in mid-August. Some of his testimony contradicted what he had initially told investigators. So during this hearing, he said that his wife was kind of propped up on a chair and he moved her to sort of lie flat. And because of his surgical background, he said that it's possible that he washed his hands, checked on his wounds in the bathroom, and then called for help. He also said that he found 2 bumps on the back of his head, 2 or 3 wounds on his chest, other wounds on his arms, and about 10 ice pick wounds to his abdomen. This did not line up with the report from the doctors that examined him at the hospital. Jeffrey said that these wounds healed on their own and he didn't require any surgery or treatment. They asked him about being unfaithful in his marriage and he said yes, that did take place 2 or 3 times, but Colette had no idea. There wasn't any evidence to prove his guilt, so all charges were dropped in October of 1970. Jeffrey received an honorable discharge from the Army and moved to New York to work as a doctor. From New York, he moved to California, still working as a doctor. Jeffrey worked hard, but he played harder because he was known for having a promiscuous lifestyle before settling down in a long-term relationship with a 22-year-old flight attendant named Candy. In the years following the dismissal, Jeffrey received a lot of emotional support from the public, and he wrote several letters to magazines and newspapers saying that he would like to tell his side of the story, I guess, to further publicize the case. Now, Jeffrey's stepfather-in-law, Alfred, had believed him and backed him 100%, but by November 1970, he became a bit suspicious. There was a 2,000-page transcript of the hearing that Alfred wanted a copy of, but Jeffrey refused to hand it over. And after a while, Jeffrey drummed up this story saying that he got some army friends to track down the murderers, well, one of them at least, torture them, and eventually kill them. A wild, wild story. Then Alfred saw an interview that Jeffrey did. Now, I tried to find this interview, but I couldn't find it. But based on what I read about the interview, Jeffrey was very cool, casual. He was laughing about the whole situation, and he never once said, "Listen, I need to find my family's killers." He didn't mention that, not once. Days after that interview, Alfred requested that the murders be reinvestigated. Then he and his wife went public to turn against Jeffrey. When Alfred finally received a copy of the 2,000-page transcript, he read it from front to back, and he realized that there were some inconsistency in Jeffrey's statements. He visited the crime scene and he studied the physical evidence, and he realized that Jeffrey might have killed his family. So he went to file a complaint so that there could be a trial. So there's a whole lot of legalities that I'm really not going to get into because I kind of don't know. I don't study law. But essentially, because of the time of the murder, Jeffrey was in the army and then he had been discharged. The complaint from Alfred was taken no further. For 2 years, the case kind of went back and forth on whether to prosecute or not. But finally, in 1974, a decision was made to take the case to a grand jury. On January 24th, 1975, Jeffrey was indicted on 3 counts of murder. On July 16th, 1979, Jeffrey was brought to trial. He pled not guilty to the charges. Helena was also brought to testify, and they tried to get a confession out of her, but she would not budge. And she also denied ever seeing Jeffrey. She denied having any knowledge of who committed the crime, and of course she denied committing the crime. On August 29th, the jury deliberated for 6.5 hours and came back with the verdict of guilty. Jeffrey was convicted on 1 count of first-degree murder for his 2-year-old daughter and 2 counts of second-degree murder for his wife and his eldest daughter. Jeffrey was given a life sentence for each of the murder, and he displayed no remorse and he displayed no emotion. Now, the story isn't finished there, kids. Right here, there's a whole lot of legal conversations and stuff, but essentially, Jeffrey said that his right to a federal trial was violated because of his 9-year wait. So, he appealed. On July 29th, 1980, Jeffrey's conviction was reversed and he was let out on a $100,000 bail. He returned to work as a doctor after all of that. Crazy, right? And he even proposed to a girlfriend. While Jeffrey was free, a whole lot of appeals were going back and forth and like a lot of legal stuff. Again, I'm not going to get into all of that. But eventually, Jeffrey was rearrested and he was sent back to his original sentencing.
Up till now, everything was totally normal. There was nothing unusual at all in our life that we were aware of. The next thing I knew, I was awakened on the couch, and I was awakened by a combination of hearing my wife screaming for help and asking for me, and my older daughter, 5-year-old, yelling, screaming for help, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And my wife was saying, "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this? Help, Jeff." And I started to push up. There was a little light on in the kitchen, which is a small apartment, and there was some light in the living room from this light in the kitchen. And there were, to my immediate view, 3 people. It turned out there were 4, but I saw 3 people, a black male, 2 white males. The black male had on an army jacket with E6 sergeant stripes. And in the ensuing struggle, there were 2 episodes of time, very, very brief, in which I saw what I took to be a white female in a broad floppy hat with stringy blonde hair. And I heard her say, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." I heard her say that more than once, and also the term acid and rain. It was raining outside at the time. But as I awakened on the couch, I didn't know what was going on. I heard my wife, I heard my daughter, and I saw these people, and I either said, and I to this day don't know if I said it or thought I was going to say it, "What the hell are you doing here? Who are you? What's going on?" And the black male to my left raised something, and he swung a club at me, and I threw my hand up, and he hit me in the head with a club, which I took to be a baseball bat. He drove me back to the couch that I was sleeping on, and now my head was ringing, and I was having a hard time getting up, and the comforter was still over my legs, but I pushed back up, and I'm trying to, and I was getting struck in the chest and about the head, and I threw my hand up again and took another blow to the side of the head, and during this time I suddenly developed a real severe chest pain, and I remember real distinctly thinking to myself, "This guy throws a hell of a punch." And I presume that was the stab wound that collapsed my lung.
Is your wife still screaming, or is that stopped?
I don't know. I don't know when it stopped. I heard her, and the voice rings in my ears to this day, so I don't know when it stopped.
So you're now cut and hit, and you're lying on the couch?
I didn't know I was being cut. I was... All of a sudden, in this struggle, I'm trying to push these people away and get up at the same time. I finally got my left leg on the floor, and that gave me a little leverage, and I started to move forward, and I finally grabbed the black male's arm as he swung it, and he kept jerking his arm away to pull the weapon away, and my hand kept sliding down on the weapon, which is how I know it was a baseball bat, because it was smooth.
Who called, then they left?
Well, the next thing I knew, I was tumbling towards the floor, and I saw the bare knee of what I took to be this white female, and I saw the top of boots. At the time, they were called go-go boots. They were light in color, and they were glistening like they were wet. When I came to, the house was silent, and my first memory, as strange as it sounds, is the smell of Johnson's floor wax. My face was on the floor, and to this day, if I walk in a room that's recently waxed, I get a very weird feeling. Because
did you call the MPs or the police? Or
when I went down into the master bedroom and found my wife brutally murdered, I tried to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It didn't work, and eventually I made my way to 2 other bedrooms and found my children in the same state. I called the MPs.
Now, DNA testing had gotten advanced over the years, and they decided to revisit the case using the DNA testing technology that they finally had, just to, dot their I's, cross their T's, all of that jazz. And neither Helena nor her boyfriend's DNA was ever found in that house. So if we had any doubt about, Helena, she was 100% cleared. Jeffrey's DNA was found in the house. Well, obviously, that would be the case. He lived there. But there was a strand of hair that was found underneath the wife's fingernails, like in her hand, and also found in one of the children's hand. And when it was tested, it didn't belong to anybody in the household. And it was from a woman because it was long, a few inches. And they never found out who this hair belonged to. Now, there's a whole lot of books and movies and documentaries and stuff like that about this case, because this case was a doozy. Jeffrey continues to claim his innocence to this day, and the last update I saw of him was 3 months ago. He's like 78 or 79 now, so yeah, he's still alive, or at least he was alive 3 months ago, right? So he's still in prison and he's begging to be let out. Now in January, he tested positive for COVID and he refused the vaccine. But that's not the reason why he's asking to be let out on compassionate release. He has skin cancer and he's under dialysis and he was given 3 years to live. So he's asking to live the last years of his life as a free man. The judge haven't come to a decision. The last time I read, I don't know if the judge said no or not. More than likely the judge said no still, but that man should die in prison. So that's all the information that I have for you guys on today's case, and now it's time for my thoughts. So first and foremostly, yes, 100% I believe that this man did it. Why? I have no clue and the world may never know. I think he killed the kids as collateral damage because his story makes absolutely no freaking sense. How can these people come in all tripping on acid and shit and they kill the kids? They kill your pregnant wife. And you, the actual pig, because obviously the kids aren't pigs. By the way, a pig would be like a police officer, a military officer. So the kids aren't pigs and the wife isn't a pig. You are the actual pig in the household and you are left alive with one single stab wound. But your daughter, your 2-year-old daughter, was stabbed over 33 times. And your 5-year-old daughter was stabbed 10 times. And your pregnant wife, your visibly pregnant wife, because she was about 6 months pregnant or so. Yeah, she was about 5 or 6 months pregnant. Got stabbed a whole lot. And you, the only man in the house, and the only pig in the house, got one single stab wound. They just knocked you. I just find that very freaking hard to believe. And I think that he knew who Helena was, and that is why he used that description. Just blame it on the druggie, blame it on the cokehead, and everything will be fine and alright for you. This military man, this man that went to college, this doctor. Like, why would this doctor kill his wife and family? Let's just blame it on the cokehead. And I'm really glad that years later, DNA tests did 100% rule her out, because I'm sure that persons probably were side-eyeing her. Like, they probably were like, okay, he did it 100%, but maybe she was involved. He might have gotten help from a girlfriend though, because whose hair was found in the home? You understand what I'm saying? And it's not like random hair underneath the couch or somewhere. It was mixed in the crime scene. So who could that possibly have been? This man, with him 3 years of life left, he needs to tell the truth, because we need to know why he killed his pregnant wife and his 2 beautiful baby girls. The world needs to know. But anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. My sources will be linked down below in my description box. If you guys have thoughts and opinions, please leave them down in the comments. And as per usual, remember to be a beautiful soul, not just a gorgeous face. Until I see you next. Bye. Did I tell you guys to enjoy your week? Enjoy your week. Yeah.